So I'm going to be describing a big journey that we've been on across the sort of health and social care system in Monmouthshire for the last 10 to 15 years, and then I'm going to talk specifically about the last 4 years where we've done some work around the systems thinking. So that's the sort of territory I'm going into. Like I said, please feel free to interrupt me. I recognise that what I'm talking about won't all fit the systems that you're working in, but it's generic enough for you to be able to hopefully take some of the learning from it. So if I just maybe start with just a bit of a context set really around Monmouthshire as opposed to Sussex or Brighton and Hove or wherever else it is that you're from. The population is quite small compared, I'm sure, to some of your population, so 91,000 people. As I said, Monmouthshire is a largely rural county with 4 main towns, so towns with the names of Abergavenny, Monmouth, Chepstow, Caldicot, Usk, which is where our headquarters is, which is quite a small little market town. And it's 530 square miles. It's a big rural expanse, so when you're delivering support to people outside of towns, it's quite a challenge in terms of logistics. And our adult social care budget, so the budget that I'm responsible for, is 29 million, and we are and have always been the lowest level of, received the lowest level of funding per head of population forever. And I mention that because it is significant, because actually it's meant that we've had to be very creative. We don't have as many. I always use Caerphilly, which is a big borough in our area, as the area that's got all the money. Now they'd say they've got all the deprivation. I would argue with them and say we've got rural issues, which lots of rural deprivation, lots of issues around isolation. We've all got different, haven't we, in terms of our localities. But it is significant because it's, you know, we've had to be quite inventive about how we approach health and social care.
Can I just ask you, how many people does that 29 million help look after?
2,500. Okay. And that's a mixture of supported home and we have a very small user of, or it's on a different slide, small user of residential and nursing care, the lowest in Wales and have been for a long time. We support people in their own homes predominantly. By 2030, the number of people aged over 85, which is a great thing, people living longer, older people are wonderful, it's what I came into business to do, but it will more than double. And we do feel like we're sitting, or rather it's sitting on top of our heads a bit at the moment in terms of that is the pressure that we're feeling, particularly at that end of the age range. And with that comes the complexity of need and, you know, comorbidities and etc. Much frailer population. And although we've been very successful at managing the money bit of our business, it's beginning to creak a lot more when people get, you know, I don't know, in their 90s plus, you know, we have a high proportion of demography that's at that end of the lifespan. I put in here the complexity of need is rising and the number of people assessed as having, this is about eligibility criteria. I will just quickly say now, we don't pay an awful lot of attention to eligibility criteria. It's not something that we do a lot of. In the world of single assessment, which people who work in local authorities in England will know, in Wales it was called unified assessment, it was one of the things you had to fill in. You know, it was, what are the risks to independence in order to work out whether somebody was eligible for service. That sort of went out the window about 4 years ago for us. But I've left that in just so that you can see that, you know, that, again, it's just supporting that higher complexity indicator, really. And projections based on spend to date. So the spend to date, which was done about 4 years ago, we projected basically that if we continued over the period of time, over the next 10 years was the projector, if you like, that if we continued doing what we were doing, we would have to keep adding money to the budget to the tune of about 25 million. That's what we expected to do. We have a graph, I haven't got it with me, where we show at what point in the system we intervened with different methods and what that's done to that in terms of how many people we support and the cost of that support. So I should have put it in actually, but again, just a bit of context. I'm also going to mention, you have the Care Act in England, we have the Social Services and Wellbeing Act, which is going to come in on the 1st of April. Very ambitious act, and we are very pleased that we've got a very ambitious act for Wales. I think it's very important. I think we're very fortunate in Wales. I mean, we're quite a small country. Everybody knows everybody, literally. You know, you do get to know everybody, certainly in the community of health and social care. And we have been invited to be involved in a way that I don't remember. You know, I saw community care come in the 90s. I think it just came in and we were told what to do and here are the forms that you need to fill in. This time round, the Welsh Government have really taken a basically co-productive approach to bringing communities of interest together, external reference groups, internal reference groups, you know, professional stakeholders, etc. And they came to the table with an emergent model. We weren't really sure, just wanted to test it out. And of course we were able to, as a community, shape and contribute and have been very much part of the evolution of that act, which I think is pretty phenomenal really in terms of, you know, a government. I think that, you know, so we're very pleased about that. But these are just some of the words that are strewn through the Act, which are probably pretty similar to the ones, I don't know if they are actually, but pretty similar to the Care Act. This is very much about outcomes for individuals, it's very much about community resilience, it's about helping people do and being able to do for themselves, it's about contribution. You know, there's some really strong, powerful sentiment behind the Act, which hopefully we won't ruin by the time it gets into practice. Like I said, we've been on a very long journey. How many people in the room have health? Not everybody, but okay. In Wales, we used to have local health boards that used to sit in each of the localities. So in Monmouthshire, we had a Monmouthshire Health Board, lovely. We knew our colleagues really, really well. There's been about 3 or 4 reiterations of reorganisation since then, and it's now all been sucked up to the mass central control tube, which is not good. Thankfully, we have those substantive relationships. I think if we were starting this now, having not done anything that we've done, I think we'd find that quite hard. Because who would we be having that relationship with? We have a long relationship with some of these people, which I don't think you can underestimate, you know, how important it is. We have integrated management of integrated teams. So a lot of people do have that. I think what's possibly a bit different, certainly in a Welsh context, is that, and certainly locally, other areas of Wales, it's managed in our domain, in local authority domain. So there are health staff and local authority staff who are all part of an integrated service, all employed separately, which doesn't actually cause us that many problems apart from the administration of that. But in terms of on the ground, that hasn't been an issue for us. And a lot of that is to do with the fact that there is real clarity about purpose. So if you're an OT in health, you're going to get paid more. If you're an OT in local authority, you're not going to get paid as much, but you can do the same job. We don't have any arguing. We don't have any. That's not a feature. And often people say, well, what do you do about that? We've not had to ever do anything about that because of the way that it's been managed. I won't mention the rest because that's very local. Despite the structural change, despite the integrated platform on which we work, which we've done since about 2008 substantively, with all that in place, you know, as I would describe, the right conditions, the right platform, integrated health and social care in a locality, despite all of that, still demand was outstripping and we were still discontent, if you like, with how we were functioning and whether we were actually delivering what we felt, you know, is the right thing to deliver. Very, very busy, recording lots of nonsense, you know, loads of deficit-based assessments, I mean millions of them, not really telling us anything particularly, but we can show that we're busy. And not enough time face-to-face, really not, you know. I think at the time when we did the original Vanguard work, 70% was how much time people sat in front of a computer churning out all of the rubbish that we don't really look at. Who's looking at it? I'm not looking at it, and I don't think many people are either. So we got ourselves into this industry of recording that wasn't really purposeful. I show this because right at the beginning of about 4 years ago when we did the original systems work, once we'd done that piece of work, we went out to everybody and said, we are on a journey, it's going to be very different, and we need absolutely everybody to be involved, and I mean everybody. You know, frontline home care worker, chief exec, member of everybody has to be part of that journey. And everybody has been part of that journey and has been able to shape and influence and change and, it sounds all very democratic, but that's how we in effect engineered that change. That's us, sat in a room, a few of us. If I'll just go there first and I'll come back. So we did our Vanguard systems thinking work back in 4 years ago in that room where all the flip charts are. And there were 12 of us. I could call it a dark room. It wasn't dark. You can see it wasn't dark. It felt like a dark room at the time. 5 days, highs and lows, and what did we learn? I've just said, we were very busy. We learned that even when we were doing all that business, we weren't getting things right. It wasn't really touching what people were saying mattered to them. And also, as part of that work, we went out and spoke to people, particularly initially in the first couple of days, about what mattered to them, and this is what mattered to people. And of course, we weren't doing that really, to feel valued and feel I can contribute. Well, we weren't really taking any notice of that, I don't think, and we weren't particularly asking people questions about that. We were going out and performing assessments. That's what we were doing. To have a key person, one point of contact, not a call centre, not having to run through many handoffs to get to the person that I last saw. One of the early things that we did was, I remember as part of the systems work, people were saying that this is a real problem for them. All our staff in our integrated service, they all have mobile phones. They're all work mobile phones. Why are we not giving the mobile phone number out to everybody? Can you imagine the hue and cry that went on when I suggested that we do that? Oh my. But we did get over it, and now everybody has the mobile phone number of. They've probably got those part-time workers and everything. No, apart from that, but it's very simple things that can actually make a massive difference. They don't cost money, and actually make it a much more human service or approach. So what did we learn about Mary? I'm using Mary as an example, a woman with multiple sclerosis, who, as part of the systems work, the 12 people in the dark room for 5 days, we had to dive into the system and really look at what was happening in our system. And it was a scary, horrible process, and I wouldn't want to do it again, because there were lots of truths that hit you that you knew about, but actually you then had the evidence that said, oh God, I really know about this now. And Mary is just an example, over 200 contacts in 2 years. And by contacts I mean referrals, assessments, all the paraphernalia that we do around people. That's what happened. So whether it was the OT, the social worker, the nurse specialist, all of these people, at some point over that 2-year period, going out and doing something to Mary in the name of health and social care. When actually, she was probably feeling very much like this, and she did feel very much like this. She came and spoke to a staff conference for us a few years ago, and it was like that. And actually, all that she wanted to do was to go out shopping, and she was incontinent. What we were doing was, does she need a level access shower, does she need a wheelchair, literally chucking the world of our paraphernalia at her. And that's what she wanted to do. And when we were digging into the case file, do you think we found anything? The one question we were asked was, can you, when you're looking through any of these case files, find out what matters to the individual? Do you think we could? We found lots of transaction, lots of what I call codified stuff. Referrals, assessments, reviews, case recording, mountains of the stuff. But asking that very simple question, so how does that matter to Mary, when Mary, all that Mary wants to do is actually, because nobody's had that conversation. We haven't gone in and said, okay Mary, how are you? We weren't doing that then. We were doing, we've got unified assessment, so in the domain of activities of daily living, what can you do, Mary? In the domain of, what medications you take, does it matter really? But, what does it? Clearly it does, your medical people. What are all these aspects of life, well, they're not life, aspects and domains of assessment that don't necessarily add that value. And we're doing this, which is we're over-engineering the problem. We do not need a helicopter to walk the dog. Equally, if we have a better conversation with Mary, we're probably going to come up with some very different methods of, when I say intervention, methods of assisting, guiding, supporting, as opposed to what we have done in the name of, our business for a long time, certainly talking from that point of view. So we learned that starting with services we often over-engineer. So our default position was, referral comes in, take the information, somebody's got a problem, it'll have been passed from the one-stop shop, which no longer exists. We pulled the plug on that very quickly. We put all our professionals on the phone, can you imagine that? OT, nurse, social worker, in 3 locality hubs. They take the calls, they have the listen to understand conversation. There was quite a bit of a, no, it wasn't too much, because actually people have been they understood the method, they understood that if you have the conversation with the person who can quite quickly cut through a lot of that stuff, it saves time in the system overall, and it's a better impact, impact for the individual. But what we realised as well, that we had created mass dependency. I mean, and we have created some dependency, and the cost associated with that dependency, not really from a financial point of view, although that's a factor, from the impact on somebody's life point of view is enormous. And 18 months ago we did a very specific piece of work. Those people who work in local authorities may or may not be familiar with the term open to review, which is that we have to go out and review people every year, but we don't keep them on caseloads. They tend to be in a pile somewhere for us. So 400 cases we went out and intentionally reappraised in a very, very different way, using staff who've been really immersed in the method, to have strengths-based conversations, to really listen to understand. They were crying a lot because they could not make any inroads in most of them, because these people were so institutionalised and so dependent that they were either suspicious or couldn't foresee a future beyond that service land. It was too hard, and they were too ingrained in the system that they couldn't see it. But the learning for us was, we ain't never going there again. We cannot create to the 400 cases where we've got that level of dependency, that actually if we'd had very different conversations, really strengths-based, really focused on outcomes, we'd be in a different place. And that's the reality when they've been in the rest of the world. But it was a good opportunity again to just dig in and really understand. And ultimately, it's a bit like when we imagine ourselves, perhaps older, and what would be important to me? Well, that I can get out, that I can go see my horses, even if I can't ride, I can do those things. What are the things that matter to me most? And when you ask yourself that question, my family, we all, generally speaking, coalesce on the same stuff. It's not rocket science. But somehow we've engineered this other world over here, the service land world, that just creates this other sort of, So when you've been through it and really looked at your systems, it just shocks you, and you can never go back through that door. You only ever go in the other direction. Random picture of Superman, I don't know who put that there, but it wasn't me. Leaders are key in this system and change process that we've been through. But for me, I'm sort of incidental. Everybody is a leader. Frontline is where most of this happens. And actually creating the conditions within which frontline, whether that's frontline professionals, frontline care staff, whomever that is, they have to be enabled to do this stuff really, really well. And often we disable by all sorts of process. And I see it in hospitals, onto our community wards, some of the bundles and goodness knows whatever else they've got to fill in. That's the 70% of the time behind the desk and not in front of the trying to support, and it's killing them. Our purpose is still simple: helping people live their own lives. That was born out of those 5 days. It took us quite a while to get to. It's very simple, I know, but it actually is the purpose by which we, across the health and social care community in Monmouthshire, that's what we're about. We're about helping people live their own lives. And everything that we do is directed and checked back against that purpose. Is that really what we're doing? We hold a lot of ourselves to account around that, because it's quite easy to slip back into, pull it down off the shelf. It's not easy to do. Okay. The other, as well as purpose, principles, very, very important. And again, these were, if you like, co-produced by everybody who was part and parcel of the change. And there's a couple that I pull out. The one that says we will value and respect our staff, trust their judgment and promote well-being in the workforce is the number one for me. If we don't get it right for our workforce, how do we expect them to go out and support people in the way that we expect? And I see this massive culture clash between local authority and health predominantly, because my health colleagues are treated pretty badly. I don't believe that they're valued, and I don't believe that they are. Certainly we will, the trust their judgment. There's no trusting of judgment. It's like take it to the top of the tree. You know, the amount of decision making that happens at the top of the organisation compared to the amount that happens at the bottom of ours, if you want to see it in those terms, there is a vast difference. And certainly our integrated workforce, you know, there's been a couple of times when we've had some problems, particularly around community nursing, because we haven't had the support professionally from the health board. We've said, oh, take them back, you know, it's getting a bit... The nurses do not want to go back because they've not had that, they've not had that cultural sort of experience from where they were previously. So I know that's a bit controversial, but that's the reality in terms of how we find that culture. And the other one is we'll take a personal outcome focused approach. We are doing, but it's bloody hard.
Can I ask a question?
You can.
How do you measure whether your staff feel that they are that you look after their well-being? You know, the reason I ask that is because I just should kind of put my hand up. Our organisation is a commissioning support organisation, and we build person-centred measures. And whenever we work with an organisation, it's mainly NHS organisations in England, we always encourage them to couple their person-centred, family-centred measure with a staff well-being measure, and almost invariably they don't, or they don't want to do it, and they can't see the point, even though we can show them the research that shows that if staff don't feel well, then they can't deliver a good job for people. And but I'd be really interested in how you actually measure that.
I'll come on to it, because I'm going to cover it in a bit. And I'll just show you some of the techniques that we use for measuring it, which are sort of quick and easy. So we use these principles to very much hold ourselves to account. Are we delivering against this? And when we get together as groups and small groups and working groups and action learning sets, we often reference back. And we don't look at them like every week. It might be every 6 months. And we go, ooh, how far towards our way are we, and what's moved in the meantime. So our focus has very much been about understanding demand, having very different and sometimes very difficult conversations with people, and very honest conversations that we might not have before, you know, really different. We are very relational. It is about relationships at every level, and we're moving away from transactional, and that's again quite a tricky one, but I think we're making progress. And decisions at the front line, I've mentioned that, you know, it is about getting those decisions at the front line where they are best made often. I'm not going to do that.
Can I ask a question
about
the focus on well-being alongside safeguarding? Because local authorities normally quite a big focus on safeguarding, which almost counters well-being. How did you manage to get that balance?
In terms of the people we're supporting?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, one of the approaches that we've taken through the integrated assessment, we have one assessment for everybody. Everybody contributes, it's just one. So it's called an integrated approach. And we very much look at risk enabling, and we look at if one of the tools that we've been using is something, I don't know if people are organised, you probably will be, Dementia Care Matters. We use an emotional and wellbeing risk tool that actually looks at, so what are the consequences of not doing this, which is actually something that the person is saying that they want to do, and it might be quite risky. What are the consequences if we get in the way of that? So we're using a number of tools to do that, but also as part of the integrated assessment, we've flipped it the other way around. We've completely flipped it the other way around. Being relational, really understanding whose risk is this, and we have to be really, really clear that it's not, generally speaking, it's not our risk. We cannot manage that because we're only there for this tiny little bit of time. We might tip in and out. How do we, with the support that is around somebody, ensure that those risks are mitigated and that they're owned, that the person themselves are owned? We have some very tricky conversations with people, particularly in that safeguarding arena. We've got one at the moment where a lady is choosing, with capacity, to stay with her husband. They've been together for years, but we, in our privileged way, have just entered their world. And of course, the alarm bells have gone off. Every member of the team that's going in is going, oh, he's hitting her, and he's doing this, and he's shouting at her, and he's horrible to her, and all this and that. And we're there to support him, but we're having conversations with her. But I think in years gone by, that would have been straight into safeguarding, straight into the local team. Would it? No. Clearly, if it needed to, we would, but it's a much more intelligent conversation about, okay, let's talk to Mrs. Let's really understand. Let's understand the context of their lives. This has been a feature of their lives. And as much as we might think it's not right, and clearly it wouldn't be for us, you know, with the right support, her knowing what she can do, us really getting her, that's how that's going to be managed. And clearly it'll be really carefully and sensitively managed, not just going, okay, it's her risk, and you know, this is complex. I call this the complex social work stuff. And it's really, really important that we get that right from a, you know, and we hold that until perhaps it gets to a point where we might need to do something perhaps different. And clearly, if she didn't have capacity, that would be a whole other different ball game. But yeah, very sensitively we have to do that. So how do we make it work? Trust and respect, huge buckets of that. We have to all get on and, you know, respect each other. A shared ethos and purpose, very much, we're very clear about where we're going and what we're doing. And recently we asked the guy who helped us, Simon from Vanguard a while ago, to come back in and just go out and just sense check. You know, I have a view.
Just saying, you wanted a 2:30 check.
Thank you. I wanted to know, you know, I hear that we're doing these things right, but can we have somebody outside to come and have a look and sense check? And very much getting that sense right from the bottom that people are living those principles, that there's evidence that that is happening, and that was very encouraging. We have a critical mass of the right people. You will have a critical mass of the right people as well. I'm very fortunate. I've worked in Monmouthshire since 1992, and there's lots of us who've worked there for a long time. So our relationships run very deep, and we have lots of sort of, you know, shared history, and there's a lot of legacy. There's also lots of new people who've joined and do join, and they get the book and they move forward. So we're very, and at all levels, at all levels. Creating the right climate. We have a meeting, a weekly meeting, no project plans, there isn't one that exists. I've got a new chief officer who's just arrived, from a very traditional local authority, who I think probably thinks that she's landed on Mars a bit, because it's, you know, you can't walk in and suddenly go, well, show me how it is on a piece of paper. It isn't like that. It's much more organic, it's much more emergent. And Oliver is our weekly meeting that the 12 people plus lots of the other staff come to, and it's called Oliver because Oliver owns one's mom. So that's what he was named by one of our staff. It was a pun, really. And we also then run a monthly, we call it DibDob, doing it better, doing it differently, and that's where the workforce get involved in shaping and designing. So we have a new IT system, we talked about IT systems this morning, self-build, on the back of this transformation. It's been in now for 4 months, nobody has screamed once, everybody adores it. You never hear that about an IT system. And it's because it's been built on the back of the change and they designed it. So that, you know, and it's one system across the whole integrated system. Interestingly, the Welsh Government are sponsoring a proprietary system for the whole of Wales. They're hoping to do a whole health and social care integration around IT. I think I'll be retired before that even gets off the mark, and we hopefully will have been able to prove our concept around this. Leadership at all levels, practitioner-led, bottom and top-down meeting everywhere. That's how it works for us. Money, so what? The money's gone down. We've underspent for the last 3 years from a community care budget point of view. As John said this morning, pay attention to the costs go up. We pay attention to practice. It's all about practice, and it'll be the thing that sees me off. Reprofiling the DNA of the whole workforce is going to be the thing that's going to take forever. We're beginning to make big strides, but it's so hard when people have been themselves institutionalised into practice that actually saying don't do that and let's move to it is quite hard, well, more than quite hard. Mentioned earlier about well-being. We use something, we use this a little bit, it's the shoeometer. And in our DibDob monthly sessions, we will often have what we call a well-being table. We tend to use different tables. And we sense check with people, where are you, how are you feeling, what can we do differently, what can you do differently? This isn't about we, this is about how can we all ensure that our well-being is safeguarded, and, you know, and they come up with lots of ideas. But we did this last time because we wanted to just check where people were in terms of the whole transformation. So we were very pleased that 20 people were in stilettos and they were proud and walking tall. We were a bit overwhelmed actually. Oh, blimey, really pleased. Hiking boots, tough but getting there in the end. You know, yeah, you'd expect that. It's not straightforward stuff. I expected there to be some people in school shoes. It's a those doubters, you know, but I was quite surprised that we didn't have any. Keeping up with the pace, 9 people, you know, people are having to run a bit, you know, people are doing 2 or 3 jobs. We are quite small in terms of numbers of people. And the 4 people in the boggy wellies were the new people who just arrived, and I think they thought, oh my goodness me, you know, this is tough going. But it would be, because there's lots of unlearning to do. So does that answer your question about that?
Yeah.
It's just a mechanism of that. And in a sense, what does it matter to this man here? It matters an awful lot in terms of if we get this right, he gets to be able to have a meaningful life that's full of fun and, you know, enjoyment, where previously he was somebody, a gentleman with a disability, who was pretty much warehoused, you know. But actually lifting the lid on this and saying, we ain't going down that route. We're going person by person, what matters, what are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. The very small things that happen to some of the individuals that we're working with are seismic. Well, they're small to us, but they're seismic to their world because they haven't had those opportunities that perhaps we've had. So I always like to show you a picture of that. And then just finally where we're up to. This is a huge transformation of the world in a sense because we started in the health and social care bit of assessment, what I call the care management bit of the world. And then it's grown into everything else because every time we looked into the system, we learned more. And every time, because we never stop looking, we're always looking, and then you suddenly go, oh, we don't want to buy the stuff that we're buying anymore. How are we going to do that? So Turning the World Upside Down, which is on the bottom, is another programme which is looking at developing a very different conversation. We are developing that conversation with the services that we commission to say, we don't know how to do this, we don't know how to mend this, but it needs mending. Domiciliary care is in a mess, and we don't want to do what we did before. We don't want to tender, and we don't want to, we don't want to come and work out how we can work out what the patchwork quilt needs to be for Monmouthshire, because it will need to be local, specific, and very varied. And we've done a piece of work over 4 days with a whole load of providers from all over the country, and 21 are up for it. And therein starts the story of trying to... Now, we wouldn't have got to that if we hadn't done the work before. All of that sort of unpicking of practice has led us to that place, as has community coordination, which is by another name, local area coordination, that comes from Western Australia, which is about planting individuals in communities and getting people up close and personal to what's going on in communities, who are the natural and local leaders. Is it Jean in the shop? Is it, you know, and really beginning to understand what there is in the community that we can build strength around. And then the Raglan project, I'll just briefly finish on this, is a project which is very dear to my heart, working with people in a place called Raglan, small town, a little community. I think emergent from this piece of work, a member of care staff and a manager came to one of our Oliver meetings and said, we can't do this anymore. They're internal both care staff. We can't do this anymore, it's not working. And obviously they've been touched by the work that's been going on everywhere else and recognised that their system was broken. So they put forward an idea to work as a small cluster of staff. So they went from low guaranteed hours and dipping all over Monmouthshire, sat in their car a lot of the time, feeling pretty shit, to going on to a 5-day, 37-hour substantive contract, and working with individuals in that community that we work with to work out naturalised support. So they know, because they used to do this, you go into Mrs Jones and on the care plan it says you have to go for 3/4 of an hour, but actually they know that Mary Joan or whoever, she won't be on. But actually the care plan says that, so we should do that. And how many times have people been forcing people to get up? Because the care plan says that's gone out the window. What matters and what is it that we know about Joan, who we are going to, we might go back, we might not go, we might do something else. And on the back of that, they've stimulated a whole approach around the community that sees them they initiated a number of community social events as well that saw people who had been sort of isolated from their communities coming back into their communities, and that's become very self-sustaining now. So the learning from that project has meant that we are now going to do that 17 more times across Monmouthshire in the community clusters where those people are. And it dovetails with the turn of the world, because that's 24% of our market. 76% is external, which is why we're having the external conversation. So all of the work and the ethos and the whole What Matters approach lends itself to any system, in a sense, and just perpetuates the more you act on that system. It feels like that. I was sent this by a member of staff who said, this is how it makes me feel. So, you know, the well-being, but in a funny way, you know, but it recognising that it's quite hard work. And I'll leave you with that. So, any quick questions before I do it again?
Well, a couple of things. The move to What Matters to you, has that resulted in the answer being we don't want what you've got? So if I understand your system, that you've probably got, you know, nurses, OTs, physiotherapists, social workers, and that's where most of your money goes.
Yeah.
Have you found that you don't need those people, and you'd rather, and by asking a different question, actually they might want hairdressers, massage therapists, and counsellors?
It's really interesting. I think there's a place and a time for the specialist support, and often when we're talking about people that we're supporting, which, you know, people who perhaps been in hospital at a fall, 95, going back home, they need at a point in time that intensive support from the integrated service. And before, what we'd have done is done that and then dropped them into the opt review pile. Yeah, that's what would have happened. Now it's much more about, so what's next and how do we move through? So that's where all the other things are coming in. But also, I'm beginning to recognise, and we're recognising as we go through, I don't think in the fullness of time I'll need as many social workers. I haven't got many, but actually what we will need is, and what's emerging is complex family work, safeguarding, and some of the really difficult stuff is where we need to put that expertise. And actually what we need is more, I don't like the term generic, but more special, when I say specialist, different support that isn't necessarily a profession, is a mixture of support, whether that's frontline support, whether it's support work, whether it's community, whether it's volunteers. We've got a big volunteer programme that runs around some of this stuff. Because what we're learning is that there's a place and a time for an intervention around some specialist support, which is generally about 20%. And sort of it's sort of like 80-20. 80% is pretty generic, anybody could, but who is that going to be? And we haven't quite worked that out. And 20% is definitely specialist that you need to pull in around people. So that's, again, it's just emergent at the moment about what might it look like in 5 years' time? Because this is shifting all the time. And I look back and I think, blimey, you know, it never stops moving. And hence why we all have to be all over it all the time. It isn't one of those, that's why you can't have a project plan, because project plan sort of stymies you. It says, this is what we're going to do, and then we're going to move to that, and we're going to do it, and then what? Okay. Whereas this is much more fluid and much more organic, and all of the people in the system are operating on the system. So, yeah.
And how have you, so one of the things that came out in one of the other workshops we went to was about, you know, a sort of sense from the presenter that the system, you know, like NHS England, it behaves in this very kind of top-down way, and therefore it's really hard for us to do anything because, you know, it'll get squashed.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, that's
No,
my view too. That actually, and actually, you are sitting in a commissioning sort of position, aren't you? So you have quite a lot of, and maybe the Welsh system is a bit different, but you know, I think it's a really important message that people hear, that actually it doesn't matter what the people up there are saying.
Well, they're often wrong.
Yeah,
They're often
well,
wrong.
they're usually wrong, aren't they?
My experience is that they're very wrong.
Yeah.
And I do think it is about individuals acting.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we found was we've acted a lot, acted out a lot, and we've created some animosity, it's fair to say. Our near colleagues, you know, who don't want to necessarily get on the page or don't understand the page. Sometimes you think they're going to throw bottles at you because it's like, what are you? You talk with fork tongue, you know.
Yeah.
Talk, yeah. And for me, it's about individual integrity. Having gone through the systems work and really looked at the system, taking the rose-tinted glasses off in the name, and really saw what we were doing in the name of health and social care, well, there's no going back. Yep.
Once
So,
you've seen it,
once you've seen it, you can't unsee it, absolutely. But you have to see it first.
Can I just ask on that question then, how do you get other people on board? I'm working on a project and it's trying to get primary care on board to a new concept.
Yeah.
Like, what are your key things there?
It's really interesting, that came up in the last group as well, which is you do have to. I think one of the things that's really helped us, and I'm not selling the Vanguard for 1 minute, but that method where we got a group of people together to intentionally do a piece of work that was to look at what's good and bad about the system. Because we all went on a normative journey, so we all take different things from that. And somebody earlier said, how do I get? And I said, those people who you know don't get it, or don't want to get, don't bother with them, leave them alone. It's not worth it, it's a waste of energy. Just concentrate on the people who you think are like-minded and share some purpose or some ideology and thinking. Because as soon as you start creating almost some momentum, it's almost, it sort of spins into, it really does spin into all sorts of doors open and connections happen, and it's a weird thing.
It's like a social movement almost,
It is.
isn't it? So there's quite a lot of research in the NHS in England about applying social movement theory to making change happen.
Yeah.
I think I can't remember the name of it, but if, I might be able to remember it and tell you it's worth reading it, because it's almost like don't go with the people, don't waste your energy with the people who aren't ready to just take the journey. You just have to go with the ones who want to come on the boat right now.
Exactly. And start small.
Yeah.
You know, if you can't start bigger, I mean, we started with a health and social care assessment and care management system, which is pretty big, but it's spun into a much bigger entity now. Because as soon as people get it and start to, it does, you know.
Well, it's the right thing to do.
Well,
isn't
you
it?
can't argue about it.
You
Like,
know,
that's the
why
thing.
would you not want to do it? Really,
That is the
you
thing.
know.
But I think in some cultures, even that thinking is you're beaten over the head. You know, I see it. You know, time and time
But it is also, you know, how you do it. Because the thing about the NHS England stuff is interesting because you know, 15 years ago, NHS government said that personalised budgets were the way forward.
Yes.
You know, the people that they were saying the way, you know, the right way to do is let people make choices about their health. But it's people like us that haven't implemented it.
And you're exactly right. And I think the other thing that happens is there's lots of perhaps laudable policy direction, but it gets diluted through senior and middle management, and actually then doesn't actually get that. For example, in health, we have this wonderful document called Prudent Healthcare. Mark Grayford, who's our health minister, it's fantastic. He's really with the people. He's been to the Raglan project. I mean, he gets it. He so gets it. But the people that are around him and that are in the infrastructure around health, particularly, they see it. They don't do anything with it. And I was at a conference recently where we were discussing how far had it been implemented in the 2 years that it had been launched. And I said, nowhere. We hand it to our colleagues in health and say, isn't this wonderful? What do you want to do in the name of this? And their response often is, well, we'll have to go to the top and see what the top wants. I do think there needs to be much more movement in health where people go, I'm going to bloody do something about this, and I'm not going to worry about the consequences of my money. I know it's easier said than done, but you know, there is that fear factor that actually I can't, because I'm only
Well, it's
a consultant psychiatrist, you know.